Hello everybody and welcome to today's professional skills series program presented by AIPC. So my name is Belinda and today we're going to be talking about case management skills for helping professionals. So a reminder to you all that the information covered in this webinar is also provided in your booklets along with extracts of relevant text. I do mention in a couple of slides some things that you may like to refer back to, and I believe you're getting that information emailed out to you later today. So my name, as I've mentioned, is Belinda. I've got a background in social work, so I completed my Masters of Social Work back in 2015. But I've also worked as a case manager for a large not-for-profit organisation, and I currently work here as an education advisor at AIPC, and I work as a telephone counsellor as well. So I guess that gives you a little bit of an idea of my background and my understanding where I come from and my understanding of case management. So to start with an overview of what we're going to cover today, we're going to be looking specifically at the case management skills that we need and what might be transferable to other areas. And we're thinking about how we gather information, identify our client needs, provide information, refer to other services, work collaboratively with our clients, and we're going to finish up with some information about advocacy. So as I mentioned, I've got a background in social work. I'm sort of veering more towards counselling at the moment, but it's certainly something that I still have an interest in. I'd be interested to hear about what you do. So if you feel comfortable sharing, please feel free to do so. It's really interesting to know where other people come from, their backgrounds, and therefore what skills they have that they might be able to share with us, what information they have, what they've learned along the way. So before we start, we're going to have a question. How do you think case management skills can be useful to other helping professions? So case management skills are useful, if not necessary, for helping professionals because our clients most likely will have multiple needs or complex needs. We'll rarely see a client that has simple requirements. Our clients may not have sufficient knowledge or skills to navigate the services or systems, and nor should they, that's our job. Our clients may not have the capacity to advocate for themselves. Our clients may not have the knowledge of the services that can provide assistance to help them meet their needs. So as community services workers, we're going to have our, we're going to know what's going on out there in the community and what kind of services might work for our client, but they may not have any idea of what services are out there and how they can be of assistance. So that's sort of where we come in. So generally, case managers take a person-centred approach to their work. Person-centred is a theory or a way or an approach that you learn a lot about. I learn a lot about during my social work studies. I find it a really great approach and I use it 100% with all my clients. So it's an approach that can underpin all of your work. So you don't sort of need to come at case management and say, I am taking a person-centred approach. It might just be something that in time you just do naturally with all of your clients. You may also have other approaches or therapies or theories that you use. The organisation that you work for might use a particular approach. A lot of organisations now have a bit of solution focused and a little bit of act in the way that they work with their clients. So that might be the case. You might have a trauma-informed approach if you're working in a domestic violence kind of area. There's going to be all sorts of different theoretical backgrounds to what you're doing, but generally a person-centred approach will underpin what you're doing. So essentially, the client is at the centre of decisions which relate to their life. And we talk about this a little bit later on when we mention self-determination. The client is the expert of their own life. We focus on mobilising the client's resources, so their social networks, their family, their friends, what they have, their strengths. Strengths-based is another type of approach, and I won't confuse you by throwing that in there as well, but if you work in this sort of area, you may well be aware of the strengths-based approach. And, you know, again, it's one of those approaches that will probably underpin the kind of work that you do. So collaboration is a word that is going to come up again and again within case management. It's a key aspect of case management, collaboration. So when we're thinking about planning, collaborative planning means the client is actively involved in the process. We identify and assess for client needs. We access and present information to our clients, and we refer clients to appropriate services. So we're going to explore these aspects in the following slides. So information gathering is a purposeful activity, and of course it's a collaborative process. So the information we collect from a client, and it might include, this might be called, you know, might be gathering information, it might be your first session with the client, it might even be called intake and assessment. There's many different ways in which we gather information, or stages throughout the process. So initially we're going to be thinking about their current situation, any statutory mandates, their financial situation, their health, their mental health, their family, their work, employment. And then we're also going to think about the psychosocial background, to how they're going psychologically, their legal history, their relationship history, work history, maybe their level of education. This is going to change for every client that you see and every organisation that you work for. They will probably have, most organisations will have a form in which you will gather information. And then you will choose how you use that information. I know there's all different types of professions within this group that we have within this presentation today. So obviously the information you gather is going to depend upon the information you need. You probably won't be gathering information unless it's important to the particular, to what you are specifically doing with that client. So when gathering this information, we use appropriate questioning skills. So we're going to largely be asking open questions, and we're going to be avoiding compound questions or double-barreled questions. So a question, for example, what other support are you receiving, and when do you receive that support, is a double-barreled question. The client doesn't know how to answer that. Do they answer the first half or the second half? It's a bit overwhelming. We also avoid why questions, because we don't want the client to feel like it's an interrogation. It's really important, especially if we've just met someone. What we're wanting to do is build rapport. That process runs in line with the gathering information process, so we want to make sure that we're thinking about both of those. We don't want to overwhelm our client with questions, probing questions, interrogation style, because that is not going to help us in building rapport. So questions like, why haven't you accessed any additional support yet, may not be appropriate. There may be a nicer way of putting that. In my experience in intake and assessment, or in gathering information, over time we can sort of develop the skill of gathering information as part of a conversation. So if we have the same intake and assessment questions for every client, we're going to become aware of those questions. We're going to know that we need to know their date of birth, their address, why they've been referred, what they want from the program. Once we've got all that information in our head and we know that that's information we need from our client, we can just have a conversation with our client and fill it in as we go. If we get to the end of that conversation and we've missed some things, we can just go back and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I realised I didn't grab your address. Can I grab that now? But I find that it's a nicer way of getting that information from our clients without them feeling like they're being interrogated. And I guess we're killing two birds with one stone, because we are also hearing the client's story and the different aspects of their story that will come out over that questioning period, I guess. So I'm going to introduce you now to a client that we're going to follow through throughout this presentation. So we're going to think about now what we've learned about gathering client information and how that can help with this client, or how we may use that information with this client. So imagine that you're about to see a new client, Joy. You've been provided with the following information. Joy is 32. She's a single mother. She has 3 sons, 8, 6 and 4. Joy's family emigrated to Papua New Guinea when she was a baby. She moved back to Australia several years ago, but apart from her sons that she lives with, she has no other family here. Joy was working part-time as a waitress in a local bistro, but was made redundant 2 months ago. Joy has concerns about paying fees for the service. So that's what we know before we meet Joy, and that's a lot. We may not usually come at a client situation knowing that much about them. That would probably be the kind of information we may gather within that very first session. But it all depends on the organisation you're working for and what information is gathered before it's presented to you. In some organisations, they have a dedicated intake and assessment person. So that person does all the intake and assessment interviews across the board and then gives the clients out, if you will, to different case managers. So if that's the case, you most certainly would get a lot of information. If you're the first port of call, you may literally just get a name. That might be all you've got. So as we mentioned, clients often have multiple coexisting needs. And this is kind of what differentiates case management from counselling. So counselling is going to be a straight one-on-one process, whereas case management is going to be looking at all these different needs as well. So while your role may involve assisting with one or more of these needs, they may require assistance in connecting with the right services for other needs. So these needs are often interconnected, and other unmet needs can affect your work with the client as well. So you may need to prioritise needs that require immediate attention, such as needs that are a threat to the client's immediate safety, needs that the client prioritises if safe and appropriate. So working with clients with multiple needs can be overwhelming for helpers. And if you have a look at your book of readings, when you receive it, you'll find a reading which discusses 9 tips to help practitioners reduce the feeling of being overwhelmed and increase your depth of practice. So if we go around that circle, the types of needs we're going to be most commonly looking for, or most commonly encountering, would be mental health issues, poverty or financial difficulties, health concerns, alcohol and other drugs, unemployment, disability, family violence, housing insecurity and homelessness, imprisonment, and involvement with child protection. So there's like a broad idea, but every single client you see is going to be different, and they're going to present with different needs. So I guess that's why we need to be constantly thinking about how we can help, who we can get involved, the different community organisations that we're aware of that might be able to assist. So back to our friend Joy. So during your first meeting with Joy, she tells you that she feels lonely as she has no other family in Australia. She's been struggling financially. She's behind in her rent with growing concerns that she may be evicted. Her eldest son, Eden, has been behaving badly and getting out of hand. Sometimes his behaviour is so bad that she has to thump him back into line. So now if we consider this extra information we've gathered about Joy and think about what Joy's needs might be. Some of these needs might need further investigation because of duty of care. So there could be some safety concerns or child abuse, things that you might need to find out a little bit more about. So what do you think are some of Joy's needs? Would you say that some are more urgent than others? What's that financial struggle look like? Is she able to feed herself and her family? Is she able to pay her rent? These are important questions. What services may be helpful for addressing her needs? Does Centrelink need to be involved? Is Centrelink already involved? There's a lot of pulling apart that can still happen at this stage. You might be familiar, depending on what you've studied, I think most of you will be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy. If you're really unsure where to start, you can go back to the basics and think about that very low level of Maslow's hierarchy. So we're really thinking about shelter and food, and those absolute basics. And if you're not really sure where to go, and if the client really isn't sure where to go, that's where you could start. The other starting point would be to just ask the client directly what their most pressing need is. And then as part of their the collaborative process, or as part of respecting their self-determination, we would respect that. So if Joy says, you know, although she's struggling financially, although she's struggling to feed her kids, her main issue is that she feels very lonely and she doesn't have anyone to talk to, that's your number one concern. You know, we need to respect the client's wishes at all times. So when providing information to our clients, we need to be following that person-centered approach. We need to be respectful, gentle, and sensitive. We need to be clear and specific. We need to be aware of flooding our client with information. So we don't want to throw too much information at them, particularly within the first session. You know, there's probably no need for it. If we're going to see our client again the next week, we can work with them again, start from scratch with them again, and go from there. We want to always empower our clients' capacity. So we're not telling them what to do, we're not giving them advice, we're letting them work it out, and we're supporting them through that. We want to encourage informed consent, so help them interpret and analyse pros and cons of their situation. We want to always check their understanding, so we want to check that if we've overloaded them, or if we've, for whatever reason, we've had to give out a lot of information in that first session, we want to check that they actually understand what's going on, that they're not just politely sort of going along with things and then walking out of our session thinking, I don't know what that was all about, I don't understand, I feel more confused than when I started. We don't want that. We want to go slowly and check in that they're doing okay. We may also help our clients develop skills to access relevant information themselves instead of just providing that information. You know, it's totally okay to say to them, you might want to Google this when you get home. Like, you know, we want our clients to have that self-determination to do things themselves. So as I keep mentioning self-determination, it's essentially a process by which a person controls their own life. So that's what we're aiming for in all aspects of case management. Just going to stop and have a quick sip of water. So there's two types of referrals. So we've got cold and warm referrals. So a cold referral provides information for clients to make contact. So in that case, we're saying, that might be the example that I just gave. Look up such and such on the internet, maybe do it between now and when I see you next. That sounded very bossy of me, but obviously you would do that in a way that, you know, collaboratively with your client. You may discuss something that would be useful, that they believe would be useful for them, and then leave them to go and work that out, or call that person, or make that contact themselves. You could even give them a phone number and say, I'm aware of this organisation. Do you want to give them a call between when I see you now and when I see you next? The other option would be a warm referral, where we contact services in the client's presence. So the one that jumps out at me might be if you work for an organisation that has a direct link to a government agency, say for example Centrelink or Child Support, domestic, if you're referring to a domestic violence shelter or something like that. You might do it with the client sitting there next to you. So you might say, I'm going to give this agency a call. I know them. I already have rapport with them. I'll get through to them a little quicker than you might be able to. Then we can work out where to go from there. So when we think about Joy, what might work better? You know, there's no right or wrong answer. It's going to depend on each referral. Some referrals are going to earn more towards being a cold referral. Some are going to earn more towards being a warm referral. It really, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. So when referring a client to a service, so we need to make sure the client is on the same page. So we need to be clear about what the referral means. So why am I referring you to these people? They might help you with X, Y, Z. We also need to be clear about if I refer you to this service, is that the end of your dealings with me? Or is it a case that I will refer you to X, Y, Z, but you'll continue to see me in the meantime? We want to make that really clear to our client. So we want to be clear about the reason for referral and the potential benefits. I'm going to refer you to Centrelink. They're going to help you a lot with the financial stuff that you have going on. That's a very simple example, but something along those lines. I'm going to refer you to the Salvation Army. They're going to be able to help you with emergency accommodation, for example. Be honest. Don't give unrealistic promises or expectations. Don't say, I'm going to call it's the Salvation Army, they're going to have somewhere for you to sleep tonight, I just know it. And then you call them and they say, we're at capacity tonight, we can't help. So we don't want to find ourselves in that kind of situation. We want to be clear and specific about information that will be shared with other services and obtain client consent. Obviously, confidentiality is always key, so if we're contacting someone on behalf of our client, we're going to make sure we have their consent first. We may need to follow up on the referral, address barriers to following through. So if you do one of those cold referrals where you ask the client or the client and you discuss and decide that they will contact a particular stakeholder in their own time after their session with you has finished, you might want to check in the next week. They might say, well, I tried that number and I couldn't get through to anyone. Or I tried that number and they said I wasn't suitable for their service. Might get more onto that when we talk about advocacy. You want to make sure that it's not just a process of the referral, but then following up on that as well. You probably want to keep notes and record the referral, and you want to make sure you're always following your organisational policies and procedures, because they will have a setup that they use. They may even have some preferred stakeholders, so they might say, we tend to use these people for this information. If we're referring people to employment services, we find these people work really well with that, etc., etc. So now consider the extra information you gathered about Joy on this slide, and we're going to think about what services you would refer Joy to, which approach of referral you might take, cold or warm, and what information should you clarify when referring Joy. So we're thinking about, Joy tells you that she wants to find work, but she doesn't know how. She's only attained a primary level of education. Her work experience has been as a waitress. So, I mean, there's a whole realm of possibilities there, isn't it? Does she want to do further training? Is that where we're going to go with this? Or do we need to get her hooked up to an employment agency? Is there a particular employment agency that's going to suit her needs better than others? Is that something we could discuss with our colleagues? They might have some ideas. Does she want to continue being a waitress, or is there something else that she would really like to try, etc., etc., etc.? So there's a whole bunch of questions to be asked there. And then once we get through that and work out what Joy is actually wanting to know, we'll then work out whether we're going to leave that with Joy to contact those people, or if we're going to sit with Joy and work through it together. So as I mentioned, collaboration is a key aspect of case management. It's important to work collaboratively with other service professionals when supporting a client with multiple needs. So we've got this diagram here with all these little circles and at least some of the common categories of services. And as demonstrated by the diagram, the client remains at the centre of our work. So we're looking around that circle and we start there with domestic violence services. It'd be really helpful to have a good idea of what's going on in your local community in that area. Medical, mental health care. If a client presents with mental health issues, probably the first port of call is going to be to check that they have a GP and they can, talk that through with a GP. Family or carer. Crisis services, there's going to be a whole bunch of different crises that are going on, that might be going on for the client, and therefore different services that are going to assist with that. Legal services, of course, legal aid jumps to mind, but there's probably a whole bunch of other ones. Most cities have a women's legal service agency. Disability support services, a government agency. Employment services can be through the government or can be independent. Centrelink in government services is a really big one at the moment. And housing services. Again, some of them are going to be privately run, some of them are going to be not-for-profits, and some of them are going to be government run. So I would also add to this list that when we're thinking about our clients holistically, we saw that Joy, one of the issues that Joy had was that she was feeling quite lonely. I guess for me, a particular area of interest is always clients' mental health. And I do believe that social isolation and loneliness is probably not going to be wholly solved by any of these sort of agencies. So on top of these agencies that provide really important services, we also want to work with our client to think about what services they might access to help with their mental health. And when I say mental health, I mean the bigger picture there, the loneliness, the social isolation. Does the client have a particular interest area that you might be able to find a community service to help with? Maybe it isn't a community service. Maybe your client has an interest in football and or bowls or a sport or a hobby, art, etc., etc. You know, we want to be looking at the big picture, and we know that mental health, social isolation and loneliness are all really big issues. So we want to try and think holistically about what kind of agencies, what kind of community services, what kind of organisations out there within our local suburb might help the client feel more connected. Okay, so now we're going to talk about advocacy. It's the last section of our skills that we're going to talk about today. So advocacy, what and why? I'm not sure how many people have come across advocacy before in their roles. Thinking about the kind of roles that you all do, probably you have come across advocacy. So in simple terms, advocacy basically means speaking up on behalf of our client. So nonetheless, advocacy also includes helping a client to develop necessary skills to advocate for themselves and into the future. So there's lots of different types of advocacy. We can think about advocacy as for an individual, systems advocacy, self-advocacy, citizen and parent advocacy. In the case management arena, but also helping professionals are likely to do individual advocacy. So we're going to be advocating to have specific needs of an individual client met. So there's different types of advocacy. So within a social work context, we might be thinking about social justice issues, you know, maintaining fairness, and these are also covered in one of the readings in your book of readings. So when we think about why would we advocate for someone, we're thinking about on an individual level and then on a systematic level. So a micro level and a macro level, the little picture and the big picture. So on an individual level, you're helping the client's voice be heard and considered appropriately. On a systematic level, you're promoting equal opportunity, equality, social justice, and social inclusion to help improve the system overall. And if advocacy is something that really interests you, that might be an area that you go with your case management. You might find that you're better suited to roles where there's a lot of advocacy involved, or you might find you're better suited to roles where there's less advocacy. I mean, I think there's going to be an element in all case management roles, but certainly in some areas there's going to be more need for that. So very importantly, when are we going to, when is it appropriate to use advocacy? Generally when clients face structural barriers to accessing services, resources or entitlement, but they personally lack the skills or the confidence to overcome these barriers. So we're not sort of letting this override the client's self-determination, but there are times when we need to step in and assist. So advocacy may be appropriate when a client has been treated unfairly or disrespectfully, they've received inadequate services, they've been refused services due to discrimination, so maybe their age, their gender or their ethnicity, they've been given treatment contrary to their cultural norms, they've been discharged from the service without valid reason, they've suffered abuse from family members or workers, a lack of understanding of their own rights. They've not been allowed to make decisions for themselves. So there's many examples. It's kind of difficult to pinpoint a specific example. You may all have examples that you've already come across in your work where someone's been treated unfairly and you've had to step in. So some tips now from the Queensland Council for Social Service all around advocacy. So what we need to think about is making sure we get the client's consent. We haven't talked about confidentiality or privacy in this particular presentation, but it is always very important. So we need to make sure we have the person's consent before you act on their behalf. Importantly, do not give your clients unrealistic expectations, which you talked about earlier. Have your facts straight and your approach thought through before you make contact with your target. Find out who you need to talk to, who can make the decision that you need to be made. Contact the decision maker, ideally with the client there so they can hear the conversation. State the case for your client assertively and clearly, and be direct about what you want the other person to do. There needs to be a point to this advocacy. We don't want it to be just us being angry about a service that hasn't been provided in the way we expected it to be. Follow up if required, for example, by providing a request in writing or for more information. Quite often, we all know from our own lives, if we put in a complaint or if we advocate on behalf of ourselves, we'll most likely need to follow that up with an email in writing or maybe a letter. If you are unsuccessful, you may be able to escalate. You could speak to someone higher up in the hierarchy in the other organisation, check with someone in their funding body, or you could ask someone else in your own organisation to take up the case. So now I invite you all to consider the extra information you've gathered about Joy and consider her needs for advocacy. So we'll read this out. We'll go from there. So Joy tells you that her cook stove is not functioning and requires repair. She has informed her real estate agent about it 3 weeks ago, but no action was taken to address the issue. She tried to call the agent again, but never reached him in person, was always asked to leave a message. Joy feels really frustrated as she had not been able to cook for weeks. She thinks that her real estate agent is avoiding her because she was behind in her payment. So what can we think about here as far as advocacy goes? Is advocacy appropriate? Why? Why not? Something jumps out to me is that you're talking about a private real estate agency. Would it be different if Joy was in public housing and you had a government agency to contact? I don't know, that's an open question for you to ponder. If appropriate, what role do you play and how far can you go with Joy's request for help in sorting this out? Is it part of your role? Is it not? Is it something you need to talk about your supervisor with? Remind participants that it's important to clarify what you can and can't do to avoid unrealistic expectations. If you deem that it is appropriate, what steps might you then take to advocate for her? What's the first thing going to be? Are you going to sit with her and help her write an email? Or are you going to write an email directly from yourself? Are you going to give someone a call? There's a lot of elements there to think about before you get started. So in review, in conclusion today, we've covered some of the most important aspects of case management. So we talked about gathering information and that intake and assessment process, what that looks like, how we can use the right kind of questions to get the information that we need without turning it into an interrogation, which may in turn make our clients feel uncomfortable. We talked about identifying needs, what's the most important need for our client, what they deem to be the most important need, what jumps out at us as being their most important needs, where we go from there. We talked about how we provide information to our clients and making sure we give them that information without overwhelming them. We talk about referring to other services. So there's a whole raft of other services out there. Do we work, how we work with those other organisations, how we refer, do we do a cold referral or a warm referral? We talked about working collaboratively with our clients, which is obviously a key aspect of all of our work. A little bit there we talked about self-determination, also very important. And then finally, we've just finished up now talking about advocacy, which is another big area of case management. So now we've got some time for questions. Obviously, we've recorded this one, so we probably won't have any questions. So thank you very much for joining me. Thanks for listening, or for the students that, for the people who did join us when we did our live version. Thank you very much. We do have another PSS coming up on June the 2nd, which is critical thinking and understanding, and that is at midday on June the 2nd, so hopefully you can join us for that one. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see you again at another presentation soon. Thank you. Bye.